I give the floor now to His Excellency Mr. Abdel Fattah AlSisi, President of the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the Compassionate, the Merciful, Your Excellency Mr. John Key, Prime Minister of New Zealand and President of the Security Council, Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, ladies and gentlemen, let me at first begin by thanking Mr. John Key, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, for convening this meeting. I would like to express my deepest condolences to UN workers who were targeted by a cowardly attack while trying to fulfill their duty to bring humanitarian assistance to civilians 2 days ago. This should not go uncontested. Our presence today is not merely to examine the heartbreaking tragedy in Syria, which we have all been following on a daily basis. We are here today to assume our responsibility as member states of the Security Council, charged with the responsibility of maintaining international peace and security, and to find a practical and swift formula to stop the bloodshed in Syria and to bring to an end 5 years of failure to reach a unified vision for a comprehensive solution to the Syrian crisis, one that rescues our brethren in Syria from their prolonged ordeal. 5 years have passed, and the bloodshed in Syria has not stopped. With hundreds of thousands of Syrians killed and millions of refugees and IDPs, the political solution remains evasive. Syria continues to suffer the rapacity of regional and international parties that have sought to exploit its predicament to achieve narrow interests, thereby creating a breeding ground for vicious terrorism, which is hijacking the future of Syria. Allow me to speak frankly about what I believe to be the root causes of the problem and the inherent flaws in the previous attempts to contain this crisis. An honest and critical reading of the Syrian crisis over the past 5 years is imperative to overcome our differences and to move forward to save Syria and its people. I would like to summarize my remarks in 3 key points. First, any honest and fair reading of the previous attempts to deal with the Syrian crisis thus far leads us to one conclusion. We have become overly preoccupied with the symptoms rather than the root causes of the problem. We continue to be consumed in a recurring debate on reaching interim arrangements, ceasefires or cessation of hostilities to reduce the killing and destruction, or in attempts to alleviate the ensuing humanitarian disaster, and so forth. We have failed, however, to move forward towards addressing the core problem, which is the absence of a just and comprehensive political solution that addresses the legitimate aspirations of the people of Syria. We welcome the cessation of hostilities reached a few days ago, thanks to the efforts of Russia and the United States, which led to decreasing violence despite certain violations, and despite the refusal of certain parties supported by the outside to uphold their responsibilities, insisting on hijacking the future of Syria. Despite all of these violations, the agreement was necessary to reduce violence. However, such an agreement in itself is not enough and must be complemented by an immediate resumption of political negotiations in order to reach a just, final, and comprehensive solution to the Syrian crisis. I hereby call upon the UN envoy Staffan de Mistura to invite all parties to the next round of negotiations as soon as possible. Second, there can be no doubt that the broad outlines of any political solution in Syria are quite obvious. Transforming these outlines, however, into practical measures on the ground requires upholding the principles of national unity and territorial integrity of Syria, and maintaining equality among all its citizens from across the political and social spectrums, with a single exception of terrorist organizations, which cannot have a place in the future of Syria that we all hope for. Yes, there should be no place for terrorism in Syria, and there is no room for attempts to rebrand the terrorist organizations. Therefore, we categorically reject any attempts to circumvent Security Council resolutions that designate those organizations as terrorist organizations. Third, It is therefore important that we recognize that we are running short of time. Every day that passes by with Syria's wound still open offers yet another opportunity for terrorism to flourish and for sectarianism to undermine the foundations of the nation-state in Syria and the Levant. Let me be honest. Anyone who thinks that there can be a military solution to the Syrian crisis is mistaken. Anyone who believes that terrorist organizations can play a role in Syria's future is delusional. Mr. President, our experiences during Geneva and Vienna meetings and with the Security Council Resolution 2254 have proven beyond any doubt that finding common ground among the key stakeholders of the Syrian crisis is not impossible, and that we can make significant progress towards a political settlement in a record time, should there be a political will. Egypt's experience in hosting an all-inclusive conference for the various moderate Syrian opposition groups in June 2015, which brought together Syrians from across the political spectrum with no foreign interference, has shown that they can agree on comprehensive documents that set a roadmap for the transition from the current plight in Syria. The Cairo conference documents were produced by Syrians without any interference from a non-Syrian party. They clearly demonstrate that it is possible to find a Syrian solution to the crisis. You must have all noticed that these documents were the foundation of every subsequent effort, Syrian or international, to put forward a practical political settlement. The road ahead is clear. The implementation of the cessation of hostilities should ideally develop into a comprehensive ceasefire in Syria, which would in turn guarantee the free passage of humanitarian assistance to civilians in besieged and hard-to-reach areas. As you all know, Egypt has had a successful experience in delivering humanitarian aid twice to more than 5 besieged areas in Syria, thanks to our open channels of communications with all the different parties and stakeholders. We continue to count on the commitment of all parties to the agreement of the cessation of hostilities as a necessary step towards easing the humanitarian tragedy and delivering aid to those affected by the conflict. We reaffirm our readiness to provide all kinds of support to this endeavor. However, the revival of serious political negotiations remains a necessary condition for the cessation of hostilities to hold and for humanitarian access to continue. History has taught us that no ceasefire arrangements have never endured without a political prospect that addresses the root causes of the crisis. Syria is no exception. Mr. President, Egypt's vision of a solution in Syria is based on 2 pillars. First, to preserve the national unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian state and to prevent the collapse of its institutions. Second, to support the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people in rebuilding their own state through an acceptable political solution that represents them all and creates an enabling environment for reconstruction efforts. From this perspective, we value the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, and we support his work for the resumption of political negotiations immediately and without delay. We reaffirm in this context the importance of including representatives from the Syrian government, along with all opposition groups without any discrimination in the negotiations, in order for these negotiations to bear fruit, in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2254. Mr. President, we have no more time to lose. With the passing of each day, more blood will be spilled, and more innocent Syrians will continue to suffer. Egypt remains keen on communicating with all parties of the Syrian crisis and is committed to working with our partners in the region and the international community to provide every kind of support for the much-needed political solution in Syria. It is our collective responsibility to restore hope to the people of Syria, and it is about time for us to assume this responsibility and to tackle the root causes of the problem immediately and without any delay. Thank you.
thank His Excellency President AlSisi for his statement.